Okay, again, a tremendous summary of a lot of data. So, again, any immediate questions for Clay on that particular topic before we move on to a more general discussion? Any specific questions? Probably, again, not had time to absorb all that yet. Yeah, Steve. I'll introduce him, Steve Dreets, while I'm walking down.
All right. Would you recommend using a lower energy diet, the energy concentration in the gilt development diet then, based on this?
We're only allowed one microphone.
Yes. So yeah, some recommendations that already exist, right, are a lower energy, higher lysine diet, or a lower lysine, higher energy diet. What I think we could do is reduce both of those and slow down gilts. But it depends on your system. It depends on when your genetics, right, and it depends on your gilt management, how you're managing those pigs in terms of bore stimulation when you get to the farm.
Any more immediate questions? I mean, let's stay right on that point, because I think every system has a thing called the gilt development diet that I know of. It's sometimes a bit hard to find out what it is when you ask the question. But let me ask this question. The units that are using, and nutritionists in the room that are using a gilt development diet, do you actually believe that it restricts growth? Or it just somehow conditions, we hope it conditions the gilt better as a breeding animal, but my experience is it doesn't actually slow them down. So there's, I think, one of the $1 million questions. I mean, we've seen in Clay's study, I mean, the top lysine group there were growing at nearly 900 grams a day at 200 days. I mean, it's phenomenal. And they are getting too big. So we've either got to be able to manage them into the herd very quickly with very little delay, or somebody's got to come up with some magical way of, I guess, getting welfare acceptable feed restriction physically down the road, or we're going to have an endless problem of large gilts getting into the herd. Good.
So it seems to me like we always try to do it with energy, it never works. But we're always afraid to drop our license on the down lower than what we can. And how are we going to stop
Okay, yeah, so that's a great question. So all the nutritionists in the room, has anybody dared to go lower, or dare we go lower?
nobody wants to do it because they're afraid that they might mess things up and understand that.
Well,
I don't think we're going low enough on the license in order to keep them from being that's part of your response to it when you did it, but they still got big in it.
I mean, certainly our experience, Jenny did an experiment 100 years ago, 10 years ago. And, I mean, the only way we could slow them down was to drop lysine, in a small experiment. But, I mean, the question is, do we take so much off them in terms of lean growth that we start to hurt them as breeding females, I guess, is the ultimate question. Because, there you want to comment?
Well, that's our concern if we drop the lysine level. I mean, we want the muscle growth for a sink for amino acid use in that P1. So is lowering their growth and making them fatter going to make us any better?
Okay. So any other wisdom on that particular point? I know the Port Board is willing to spend millions of dollars on getting the answer, right, Chris?
So this doesn't directly answer the question, but so the long term on this project is following these gilts through 3 parities, and so I think we're this time next year we'll be able to answer that question much better. And so I think we're in position to start to address some of the things you were just saying. If you take muscle off of them, but you can add fat, do they still have enough energy And, you see some sows in lactation mobilize nothing but energy and some fat, it seems like. So the way they mobilize that during lactation is also going to be a challenge.
Okay. Any other more nutritional wisdom? Some Canadian experience here. James Hofer from Manitoba.
So, George, you're going to take these gilts out to out to third parity. What are you going to do in first, second, and third parity in lactation? Are you going to feed them different? Or I know South Dakota State University has a dual drop in their new barn, and I feel that if we're going to maximize these gilts' potential, in my mind, that process is not over until she's been weaned once.
Sure. I mean, clearly that's true. If we're talking about lifetime nutrition, it's interesting to me. Phase feeding comes and goes. I think scientifically there's irrefutable evidence that phase feeding in gestation is justifiable. Whether it's practical is another question. But I noticed some of the genetic companies now are looking at quite restrictive, compared to NRC, quite restrictive feeding in gestation, because these sows are so efficient. I know we were feeding sort of what we always fed for 10, 15 years that I was in Edmonton, and at the end they were putting on 50 kilos of gain in first gestation. So there's a whole, I think there's a whole lifetime strategy we've got to develop for these females to keep control of them basically, and make sure we don't hurt them, particularly in first lactation. I think if we can get them through first lactation, we're pretty safe. But clearly that's the risk we have to get through together. So I want to move on now, because that's nutrition is one component of this whole thing. The people that produce the gilts for us are our genetic companies. They clearly are producing phenomenal females. So it is Juan Carlos and PSE have been big research partners in the whole of my career in Canada. And in North America. So one, we've got a couple of slides. He's going to speak to sort of what a genetic company would tell you about gilts, and I think this would be almost speaking for genetic companies collectively in what the aspirations would be for gilts in this century.
All right, thank you. So when I send the slides, I send it without the PIC logo. Yes, but I didn't want to hurt susceptibilities, because this is more, I'm going to say, more focused on knowledge and share expertise than make this a propaganda. Okay? So anyway, can you hear me okay in the back of the room? Great. So currently, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to echo your voice. I'm talking about every breeding stock supplier out there. Okay? The females, the genotypes that we have currently are not the same as they used to be. More seasoned people in the room will clearly tell you what are the main differences. I can't, because I'm too young. Okay? So, back in, I'm going to say 15, 20 years ago, it was a common complaint from the industry about quality of feeder legs. Today I don't see that as much or as often as we used to see it. Okay? Animals grow faster, out of what you were saying earlier, and they tend to be leaner. Okay? Today, with the animals we do have, environment plays, I believe, an even more critical role than before. Animals are living in the edge. Anything that is against them could place them in a non-comfortable position. Okay? In the last 9, 12 months, we have been dealing in different places with situations that were not that common before, and still we don't know the reasons for this situation to happen, like gilts having problems to cycle, people with way more knowledge and experience than me have been involved in that. We do believe that there are risk factors that we should be able to recognize and control. Multi-sources, different health status, different immunological levels can play a role that we never thought before. Okay? In terms of targets, I do believe that the targets, we should talk about, first of all, more complex metrics. If we stop at the parity 1, having X number of piglets in parity 1, we are not taking into consideration other elements. Parity retention must be part. If the farm system has a low retention rate, is another way to say, well, there is something to improve in our Gilt program. Okay? There are different outcomes between companies, and what is more amazing than that is that within the same company, you have different results. With gilts coming from the same multiplier, going to the same GDUs, going to more or less similar farms, similar layouts, similar people, more people or less people. Why one farm or flow produce way more than the other with the gilts? I think those are one of the questions that we need to understand. And I honestly believe that we need to have new metrics going forward. What we use today is not enough. Early this morning I was having a conversation with Randy Stacker, I don't know if he's around, about, when you go to a building and the conversation with the person in charge of the building is, do you believe that for example, the air is stuffy here? The conversation stops when the guy will tell you, no, it's not. It's perfect. The conversation is going nowhere after that. So we need to add metrics that take into consideration elements like that. Okay? Okay, everything is different. However, some people, not you, other people, still manage and breed the gilts the same way, the same weight and age as your parents or your grandparents. So in a way, some management strategies are not taking into consideration everything that is explained there. So for discussion, I don't have all the answers. Opportunity. What is the size of the opportunity in front of us? I put there a number, and the number is only for reference. I say that if you want to have a farm averaging 16 total born, you need to have gilts farrowing 16. And that is something that I do believe that we have, the industry, have accepted this, that the gilts should farrow one piglet less than the other adult female because they are gilts. Well, in many farms, companies, people sitting around the room, they have farms where the gilts are producing same number of piglets as adult sows. So it is possible, it is doable. Okay? I think we need to try to force the paradigm a little bit. Okay? Bend the paradigm, maybe. Gilt management is more complex, and starts earlier. I feel miserable when I go to farms or system and they treat the gilts as finishing pigs up to 20, 25 weeks of age, because they do believe that they are finishing pigs. And they consider them as the future replacement when they start the boar exposure. I think it's too late. What are some of the resources needed? Well, it's like evident. People, boards, and records. Jenny mentioned earlier, records. Have you ever seen farms using colors for the week? Well, I'm color blinded. So I don't understand the marking the gilts with a color for every week. does everybody know working in the system what the colors mean? Maybe they do. But I do believe that we have to have records. Then facilitate the board's work in stimulating and identifying the hypnoservices. Help the boards to help us. We need to have enough number of boards, of working boards. We need to have plans to replace the heat detecting boards. Also, we need to help the guild to express their natural behavior. You know, but when farms don't allocate enough resources, not enough labor, to do a good job on this, you know, there will be people doing this for 8 hours a day. Hours 6, 7, and 8. I do believe that the guilds will not express anything. Maybe I'm wrong there. 7 days a week job, in many places is undoable. Sometimes because it's a model that is fixed in people's mind. Then information, you mentioned several times the weight, Jenny, you too. Everybody knows about the weights. Can I ask the audience, please raise your hand, and in true honesty, who weighed the guilds? 1, 2, the Canadians. Mark, Peruvian. Where are you from? Chile, great country. Okay, so I'm going to say 99% of the people in the room don't do that. Well, so how can we talk about weight if we actually don't know the weight? How can we manipulate the diet if we don't know the freaking weight? Sorry, excuse my French.
Your English is getting better.
Well, Steve doesn't understand me. Steve Rich, are you using your translator? No. Okay, so that take me back to, this point take me to the last one, strategy and opportunities. You know, I was very interested in your presentation. I think there are things to do, you know, but there are opportunities. If the opportunities be, you know, we have to do something. You know, in this type of session, you know, the help, you know, the University of Alberta leading the way on the guilds for many years. This type of session, the Saturday session, you know, it's always welcome. And more than anything else, what I wanted to put on those 2 slides were a few thoughts on things that maybe we should see in a different way. There are no numbers there. A few thoughts. So.
Thanks, Juan.
Should I say here?
So, we're close to time. You're entitled to leave whenever you want, but if you want to stay around for a few minutes discussion, then please do so. I think what you're hearing there is the frustration probably collectively of our suppliers of good genetics is they will do it, they will perform, but we've got to, I'll be more brutal than that. We have to do more. We being people at production level now, speaking for those in production, we have to do more to realize this resource. So, lots of things we could discuss. I know one thing that's sort of in the room, a little bit of the white elephant at the moment, and it's very clear. Jenny showed you a couple of distribution curves of responses, heat responses to bore stimulation, and that's good bore stimulation. And you can see some months it's a disaster. We'd like to see 60% by week 3, week 2, sometimes we see 40%. Where we've worked in herds where we see a really big drop, we're usually able to identify what has happened because we've been there at the time. The pipestone data that Jenny showed you, the really poor response was they did a PRRS serum treatment of the whole breeding herd because of a PRRS virus problem. And the gilts just stopped. They stop growing, they stop eating, and they stop responding to the boars. It's quite straightforward. But I think it's quite clear recently that there are subclinical things going on in grow finish. or gilt development, let's try and stop calling it grow finish, but during gilt development there are probably subclinical problems going on. And like Juan has said, the gilts are really, really sensitive to those challenges before we start to do the stimulation program. I think the industry, a good analogy to me is, I think universally across the industry, we all recognize, particularly in gilts, the importance of that 14-day period before breeding the gilt, to have them stable, to have them on reasonable feed intake. They don't have to be on ad lib, but they've got to be on decent feed intake, and you don't want to be challenging or challenging them, or you lose feed intake and you lose about a pig a litter very quickly. It's exactly the same situation biologically before you go to stimulate them. And so I know with Holden Farms we've worked very hard on the protocols, if you like. The pre-stimulation period is critical to set up the stimulation period. So we try to make sure that in that pre-stimulation period, if you like, the same 10 to 14 days before stimulating, there's no vaccination, there's no remixing, they're all on full feed. That's absolutely critical to get the sort of responses we've shown you today. So, like moving sow farms in the middle of the program, to me is just a wreck. It's a disaster. I mean, you think of all the things you do to a gilt. You get a transport stress, but transport stress isn't going to cover you when you mess up gilts right in the middle of that critical program. So that program, whatever it is, a 28, 30, 35-day program, is a sacrosanct bit of time, but the 10 days before it is even more sacrosanct in making it happen. So let me put the question this way: why can't we do it? Direct bore contact is the only way to do this thing effectively. So why do we keep persisting on trying to use fence line contact? Forget it. Bores to pens of 22 gilts, we've seen the problem. It's not enough stimulation. You need a ratio of about 3 bores fence line and 1 bore direct, and a maximum ratio of 15 to 1. It's in the literature. Tim Staley pointed out on Saturday. Paul Hughes and a whole bunch of people 20 years ago showed us the physiology of bore contact and bore stimulation. So why don't we do it? I don't see much point in spending a lot of time discussing it. We've got to do it, because if you don't do it, it doesn't work. And we can't get the flows we want. We can't get those animals into production with low enough weights to keep them in the herd. So any highlights, points, particularly anybody got a really valid reason why we can't implement a good program? That's the question I've got today. I know the groups in the room that do. So for the groups in the room that don't and don't get the results, what is the valid reason not for doing it? Good. So there's no valid reason for not doing it. So this time next year, Juan will come back and we'll make your gilts perform beautifully. Yeah. And do weigh them or measure them. It is a critical metric. And I hope you've learnt today a lot of the things you need to hear to encourage you to do it. And I thank you for being here this morning.